Welcome to a video where I will now fly my spaceship around the ground level using my alien technology. It's joysticks, buttons, more joysticks. And here we have Flight of Nova. And the objective here, which you will see briefly, is I'm going to fly the ship upright. So at the moment you can see it's VTOL, but I'm going to fly like this. But I can't fly like this while watching the third perspective of it. I just have to fly through the cameras, the cockpit cameras. So you can see that normally in forward flight, it's rocket powered, and the wings aren't that aerodynamic, so it's not terribly constrained, but this does simulate airflow dynamics, and it's kind of a big ship. So it does move around a little bit slowly. And this base right here, as you can see, has some buildings that are actually organized in a way that can provide for some obstacles. So what I'm going to do here, so you see I got to pull my ship up, and then it's nice and flat, so then I start to be aerodynamically So here, for example, is a tunnel which I have yet to successfully navigate, but it looks like I can make it through there. So let me see if I can. Oh no, I'm gonna crash from trying to use the cameras. Okay. I'm not sure if that's navigable. I see invisible material. So let me try to fly through here. So that hat that I showed at the beginning is my favorite baker. They're called Wallflour Bakeshop. You can find it at the Kaka'ako Farmers Market in Honolulu. And I went there today and I got some bread, and they're always very nice, and the bread is amazing. And I mean, you know, you go a lot of places and you have good bread, and there's a lot of good bread in the world, but they are among these great tasting breads without a doubt. So I would describe it as a world-class loaf of bread, and them as world-class bakers. So, because most of my day consisted of enjoying that bread, I wanted to show their logo at the beginning. So I don't think that I can show the third person camera view while I'm in here. But you see that I'm trying to fly using the rockets to hover low to the ground. And trying to fly through some obstacles. So the goal here is to eventually figure out how to get maybe quite a bit better at flying in this style. And I like to describe this style of flight as rock hopping. And so rock hopper is a term from the popular sci-fi series The Expanse. And it's a little bit different than the use of the word rock hopper in the series. But in the series, of course, rock hopper means hopping from asteroid to asteroid. But incidentally, all of the ships in the Expanse that are used by belters, the rock hoppers themselves, look like kind of like lunar landers. They're kind of built like lunar landers, and then they land on the rocks. And then that's exactly what they would be doing: is they would be using their primary propulsive thrusters to fly vertically around. So even though what we can see here is I've got this single stage to orbit hypersonic nosed shuttle, the style of flight still reminds me of rock hopping. So of course normally the way that you would fly in the hovering in this game is using the VTOL. So you can VTOL here. You just switch your engine mode. You can see right there I'm in VTOL mode. And you can see my engines are down like a Harrier's or something like that. But the power available to the vehicle is less. So if I pull back and I switch to cruise, you see cruise light up over there, then maybe you can see that my power is actually significantly more. So the advantage to VTOLing in the upright position on cruise mode is that you have quite a bit more power. So you have quite a... I might not make it here. I crashed. I'm talking too much. So here's my crash. So the purpose, the goal is to get more stunt abilities, like a quadcopter. So an interesting thing about the controls for a VTOL ship and a helicopter and a drone is that they're all kind of similar. So actually you might be able to see on my alien technology here that I have some quadcopter controls. That's not what I use. I use roll back here, I use pitch and yaw right here, and the throttle up here for this. But you could just use the quadcopter controls. It would work just fine. And some people might prefer that, but I come from another direction where I'm trying to fly 6-axis. And so the only control that switches is I lose translation controls and then I gain and then my throttle is different, a little bit different in atmosphere. So I'm using all the same controls that I use for the other parts of this gameplay. When I play a quadcopter simulator, I probably would just use the 2 top sticks. So flying like this upright is a little bit unintuitive for some, and I've had the conversation where people say, oh, they don't fly like that, it's a little clumsy for them. And the reason is because if you're in forward flight, then you set up your controls so that yaw is one controls and roll is the other controls. But if your controls stay the same and you switch cameras, so that now you're flying in the upright position, as we can see here. Now actually my yaw and my roll controls, they switch. So in order to roll or look left and right, well, I am still yawing. Nope, I'm rolling. And then when I use the yaw control, it rolls me. And the controls are a little bit different in the fact that they respond differently, because now in your mind, not only is your finger doing a different thing, but your yaw gets really fast, and that can move your mind up too. You kind of disassociate your fingers from your active thought, and you can get kind of confused because you're not thinking, oh, my middle finger, you're just kind of thinking make ship move. And then what ends up happening is that you are associating the expected speed of change from your control input, but you're not somehow connecting that which one is going which direction is the same as which one is changing more quickly. So you get really kind of confused because your brain is not thinking finger and then thinking roll and then thinking how fast it is. When everything's working correctly, all you do is just kind of interact with your mental image of what you see, and everything else is passive. So when you kind of get disoriented and you're doing something wrong, it's not an active process where you know that one of your fingers is doing something wrong. That's not what happens at all. Instead, what happens is that your brain just tries to move everything everywhere and see what happens, and then get reoriented again. Kind of like if you're going to find your balance, all of your muscles just kind of spring into action, and you do a whole bunch of little tiny motions at once, and then eventually you get stable again, or maybe you fall down. So that's kind of what it's like when you kind of get confused about what's going on when you're doing the different joystick controls all at the same time. But actually, over time you get smoother, and you do this little wobble, this little balance wobble, where for a brief moment you're disoriented, and then you get reoriented again, and everything just kind of seems to work right. So when you switch cameras, you get a little wobble, and you're a little bit backwards for a minute, and then after a second, then you kind of get more oriented again, and then you're back to the usual. And then another time that I have that happening in this game is that I have the flight controls inverted while in atmosphere for pitch, which is common. Airplanes you pull back to pull up. But in space, under RCS thrust, I have it set up so pointing up turns the camera up. And then it gets kind of confusing at that time, because for a brief moment I try to pull up and it goes down. And then I do this wobbly thing where I don't actively think, or maybe I do a little bit more in that case, but it's the same kind of thing. It's more like you kind of find your balance, and then your brain kind of resettles back in to what it's doing. So as we can see here, I have a pretty significant blind spot. And this is one thing that I do wish we could see change in the game, is that with a quadcopter, for example, and I know they do this as well with helicopters, but with the quadcopter, when you're flying forward, the same thing happens with your thrust. So here we can see the thrust is actually straight down. So in order to go forward, you kind of lean forward, and then now you'll start going kind of forward, but you kind of gotta go up and forward at the same time. So if you had a camera that was at a 45-degree angle in your forward direction, at this point that camera would be looking straight forward. So with quadcopters, that's exactly what you do. You put a camera so that your camera is at an angle, but because you have to kind of fight gravity the whole time, you always need to be kind of pointing up. Now your camera's looking forward. So if there was a nose camera in the game that looked at about a 45-degree angle here, then I would have this upright camera horizontal, and then I would have a 45-degree angle camera so that I could see where I'm going here, and then of course I could look out my window when I want to fly out of the cockpit. So when you kind of go somewhere, then you're always in the cockpit. The ship is not very aerodynamic in any other angle, so. But the 45-degree angle camera would actually be nice when you're coming in for a landing as well. So there's this kind of weird time where, let's see if I can land here, where you kind of, whether you're flying in upright like I am right now, or whether you're flying in flat, because you're moving forward, if you want to slow down, you need your VTOL, you need to pull back. so I'll just try to demonstrate that. So if you're flying forward and you want to kind of stop, you might switch to VTOL, but now you need to pull back in order to slow down, because your thrust is going to slow you down, right? But now you can't really see with the belly cam because it's not looking forward enough. You can't see out of your cockpit at all because it's just looking up. So the other time that nose camera would be really nice would be during regular gameplay, flying the normal way for approaches. But one thing about that is, especially with these simulator games, with these different kinds of simulator games, it's kind of like your rearview mirror out of your car. You can't actually see what's right behind your car, or even what's right in front of your vehicle. And you kind of have to look in advance, and then your brain remembers. And that's part of the gameplay that people are trying to preserve in a lot of these games. So yeah, you can't see correctly, but over time you see the long landing pad coming up in advance, and then there's this period of time where you don't see the landing pad, but maybe you see something else around you. And then part of the gameplay that people are preserving is you have to train that skill. But the thing about that is that sometimes you only see sky, and the sky doesn't help you in that case. And then of course there's performance flight, stunt flying. And during the stunt flying, it really gets hard to do that, because you want to be kind of dynamic and reactive without having to be all the way fully familiar with the area. So I still think that it would be a nice inclusion to have that camera. This other camera this other camera, you can use it, and it's nice for a video because now you, the viewer, can see, but it's kind of not really what you want to have as a pilot, because if you want to be pretending you're in your own spaceship, here we have this camera at third-person view. That doesn't even make sense. And then it's kind of a little bit of work because you switch to it and it's always in the one place, but then if you fly around, it doesn't it's always in the same place, and then it doesn't move when the ship does, so you kind of have to constantly move the camera in order to use it. So for example, when you're approaching a space station, you need to see behind you, because that's which way you're going, because you're trying to slow down, because you're using a rocket to fly at a space station. You have to turn around in order to come to a relative stop with the space station for the rendezvous. So you need to see behind you, and there's also no camera mounted to the vehicle where the pilot would see behind them. So you kind of have to either fly blind, or you have to use this third-person camera, and then every time you want to switch to it, you need to swing it around, which you can do because it's kind of a heavy vehicle, so everything happens kind of slowly. But on the other hand, it's less desirable overall. So with cameras, there's always these arguments. You start putting a lot of features in the game, it kind of changes some of the gameplay dynamics, but additionally it gets overly complicated for beginners because they want to use cameras, but they only have 2 buttons on their game controller, so they're only going to use one camera, and then there's all these camera controls everywhere, and where do you draw the line, and how much work are you going to do for the one person that wants it? Kind of when that comes in. Anyways, this video was designed to kind of demonstrate the vertical flight, where you use the thrusters to hover, but not the VTOL thrusters. And then I was going to talk about how yes, the controls do get kind of switched around, but over time you get a little bit better at it, and it's not really, it doesn't really take that long to kind of get used to things. I think it should be perfectly doable if you can already play the game as it is. And it should just be a couple of tries. I don't think I can land, actually, third person like this. See, this VTOL just doesn't have that much power. Not that it's not that realistic, it's just not very good for high performance flying. Actually, when you're redirecting your thrust like that, you would lose a lot of the engine performance. I'm pretty sure a Harrier doesn't have the same kind of performance in VTOL mode that they do in forward flight. Oops, my landing gear was up. Alright, thank you very much.